With Girafarig finally being banned from Little Cup, everybody wants to have the answer to the question, who is going to be the next top dog? Who will be the best in the coming metagame? And the common consensus so far is that it's Gastly, due to its Stab Shadow Ball no longer being blanked by the biggest tier king threat, that also completely threatens Gastly with stuff like Psychic and Twin Beam, Psychic Fangs, Crunch. It was really rough for Gastly, but the question is, what makes Gastly the tier king? Why not something like Drifloon, Grievard, Sandygast, Bramblin, all the other ghosts in the tier, as well as stuff like, well, what about Pawniard? What about Toadscool? What about Diglett? Why aren't they at the top of the tier list? That's what I'm hoping to answer today. So first, we gotta go over the ghost types. We have Gastly. It's got a lot of flexibility. Also, if you want to have some recommended sets for how to run Gastly, go to Sample Sets. It's under the Import-Export tab. But you have this Eviolite set. You have Hex, Sledge Bomb, Will-O-Wisp, Dark Pulse. And what it's all trying to do is status your enemy with Sledge Bomb and Will-O-Wisp. Also, Sledge Bomb's really nice because it's a stab poison type move that does really well neutrally against a lot of things. We'll see them coming up. But then you also have Hex, which doubles in power if the target has a status ailment, which can be achieved through Will-O-Wisp or Sledge Bomb. And then you have a fourth slot that can be really variable. You can run Terra-type Dark Pulse for the express purpose of beating other Gastly, which can be funny. You have Dazzling Gleam if you want to, so that way you can break over fighting types more easily. That also doesn't blank into dark types. You also have Psychic, if you don't mind blanking into dark types. You've got a lot of coverage options. And it's really nice, especially when you're so bulky, even like so bulky in very heavy quotation marks. But the point is that because you have Eviolite and Will-O-Wisp, you can take a lot of attacks because although you've got kind of bad bulk, 30 HP, 30 defense, 35 special defense, you've got really good speed tier. You get up to 18 at level 5. And that's really important because you have very few things that actually outspeed you. I think it's only stuff like Meowth, Wiglet, Diglett, Voltorb, Weasel, Wingull. There's very little that actually outspeeds Gastly, meaning that has a really good matchup versus a lot of the metagame due to fast Will-O-Wisp, fast coverage moves, fast Sledge Bomb if they're not resistant or immune to it. It's got a lot of stuff going on. Next up we have Life Orb. Gastly's HP is 30, which means that you get 19 if you have max IVs, and that's important because Life Orb deals 1/10 of recoil, 1/10 of your HP in recoil after each attack with a 1.3 times damage bonus as the benefit. And because you're at 19 HP, you only take 1 in recoil every single time, which is pretty nice. Keeps you really healthy despite the fact that you're a Life Orb attacker and you're slowly whittling yourself down. You've also got really nice immunities that allow you to come in, being normal, fighting, and ground. Because you're Ghost, you have normal and fighting immunities. You have Levitate as an immunity to ground. That also means that you don't have to worry about stuff like spikes, which is nice. And you're also a poison type, which is a really nice defensive typing. You can run Shadow Ball here. On the Eviolite set, if you don't want to run Hex, you can also run Shadow Ball, so that way you're not status reliant. But you have Shadow Ball, once again Sledge Bomb, it's really good. And then you have Terra Blast Fighting, so that way you can break over dark types such as Pawniard, Zorua. And if you're worried about Magnemite or other steals, you can also break those a lot easier. Then you also have Substitute, so that way you can ease prediction. If your opponent has to attack into you and they have to stay in to make progress, it's really easy to play around that from your perspective and really hard for your opponent. So if you substitute on the opposing Pawniard getting in, well, they have to come in and attack into you, which is a really hard time for them. So what they have to do is, if there's Scarf, it's fine, but they have to attack into you with an attack. And because of the Terastallization, you can just Terra Blast Fighting and delete it. And it just eases prediction really well. Your opponent can't just use U-turn and not have to deal with consequences because you quadruple resist it because you're Ghost and Poison type, so that's always really nice. If you want to, you could also run Terra-type Ground to be really annoying. And also meaning that, oh, well, I'll just Volt Switch instead. Haha, no you won't. Next up, we have the Choice Scarf set. And it's really notable for being the fastest relevant Scarfer. Of course, you could run stuff like Scarf Diglett, Scarf Wiglet, Scarf Voltorb, but I don't think any of them would actually be really all that good. The reason why Gastly is so good is because, once again, the 3 immunities part, meaning that you can come in kind of often. But you also have great special attack, and you still have really good speed. You're the fastest relevant one, so you outspeed stuff like Choice Scarf Mankey, which gets up to 17 at level 5, Choice Scarf Zora, also 17, but then you outspeed stuff like Choice Scarf Magnemite, which reaches 22, and Choice Scarf Pawniard, which reaches 24. And then you still can run Terra Blast Fighting, so that way you can break over Pawniard, which is nice. You have Shadow Ball, Sludge Bomb, you have this coverage move, you can be Destiny Bond if you're worried about water types, you can run Thunderbolt, all depends on your team structure, all that sort of stuff. It's really nice. And because of all of the immunities, it's really good stat line when it comes to its speed and special attack. It has a lot of flexibility when it comes to what exactly it wants to do. If I want to have a boosting Nasty Plot set on Gastly, go for it. You got Nasty Plot, and then you can run Substitute as well, and then you can do something like Shadow Ball, Terra Blast Fighting, and then you have a really good Eviolite attacker that can break over its most common checks. And it doesn't have to worry about blanking into Girafarig anymore and dying to Twin Beam because it no longer exists. So that's pretty cool. Now what about the competition? What about the other ghost types? So we have Drifloon here. It's got a lot of very interesting sets that it can run as a result of the ability Unburden, which means that your speed is doubled on held item lost. So if you consume an Oranberry, if you get knocked off, your speed gets doubled, which is really, really nice. And this is the standard set that they have. Defog is really important because you get rid of all of the hazards on the field, and it can't be blocked by opposing ghost types, meaning that you can remove hazards even if your opponent has a ghost type facing yours, which is nice. You have Acrobatics, which doubles in power if the user has no held item. And since you're wanting to proc that very often, you'll have a 110 base power Acrobatics coming off of your stab because of your flying type. You have Will-O-Wisp again, so that way you can disable the enemy team, make them less good as physical attacks. And then you have Terra Blast Fighting to break over Pawniard. You can also replace this with something like Destiny Bond, and then do Terra type Flying to have a boosted Acrobatics if you just absolutely need that. But then you also have pretty nice move pool, all things considered. If you want to run Haze, you can, because like, oh, well, I take one hit, and then I get Unburden, and then I can haze away all of the boosts. It's all A-okay. You have Thunderbolt, you have Calm Mind if you want to run that, Stored Power, Tailwind. You have a lot of very nice moves to run with Drifloon. And your stat line's pretty good. 70 speed gets you up to 17 level 5, which when boosted by Unburden becomes nigh unstoppable the entire tier. You've got some okay bulk, special defense, and defense. They're a bit lacking, but because of your high base HP, and because you only need 4 EVs to get from, in this case, 10 to 11, it's really easy to fit that onto your spreads. So it's whatever. Really nice to do. Like, you start at 9, it's like, oh, well, I can just keep on going. It's all okay. If you want to, you can also run a special attacker set, or you can do the pinch berries. So if we have Lychee Berry, what the pinch berries do is that when you're at 1/4 of your HP, you will consume the berry, and then you will get a special effect based on that. Lychee Berry is attack. If you look through like all of the, well, there's also some for HP, like Eapa or whatever. But like you can look through these, find the specially offensive one if you want to run a specially offensive set. Ganlon Berry, if you want to run, like, those are the kind of berries that I'm talking about, where it raises your insert stat here by 1 stage when at 1/4 HP or less. So you can run that, pair with Unburden, and then you can become a really good sweeper. You don't have to run Defog. You can instead go into your pretty nice pockets when it comes to your move pool. You can run Psychic, Shadow Ball, Thunderbolt, Terra Blast, so that way you can do whatever flavor coverage move you want. You have Acrobatics on the physical side. You don't really have good Ghost Stab on the physical side. You have Phantom Force, but that's it. It can be really easy to be played around. But you have a lot of options when it comes to how you want to play Drifloon as a result of Unburden, and it's a pretty nice stat pool. The main issue that makes Gastly better is that if Drifloon wants the speed boost, it needs to have its item consumed, whereas Gastly is 1 point faster. It gets 18 at level 5. Excuse me. Or you can run the Scarf set to be really fast on baseline. Like, Gastly will outspeed every common Scarfer before needing the Unburden boost, and Unburden goes away after you switch. So it can be really tricky to get the speed control out of Drifloon you want. And if you may be thinking, oh, well, I can just run Aftermath plus Eviolite. It's not great. I know that you have a good amount of HP, but the main issue is you don't really get to have the Unburden boost, and it's really valuable doubling your speed because that means that you get the jump on a lot of Pokemon. You don't have to worry about speed types with something like Brawler, which typically runs coverage moves in order to hit Drifloon, such as Thunder Punch or Ice Punch. So it's really hard to justify not having Unburden, but also you kind of need it to function, but that also cuts down your bulk, so it's got good traits, but the main issue is that it doesn't have all the traits that it wants in order to be anywhere near as good as Gastly. Next up, Girafarig, the goodest boy. It's got Shadow Sneak for good priority, Ice Fang so that way you can threaten out Toadscool, Stomping Tantrum is just a really nice coverage move, and then 4th slot, it's operational. You can run Destiny Bond, you can run Rest, you can run Yawn. It's got a lot of flexibility there, but the reason why Girafarig is the goodest boy is because all good boys have very good coats. So, that's not to mean like hairless dogs or whatever, just coats are very nice to pet, okay? But it's got Fluffy, which means that you take half damage from contact moves, 2 times damage from fire moves, and this sort of has its own synergy because you're also a ghost type, and because you're a ghost type, you have a normal immunity, which is exceedingly valuable for dealing with something like Rapid Spin. And Rapid Spin removes hazards such as Stealth Rock, which greatly affects fire types. So there's some pretty good synergy on there already without even trying to do anything. And it's the best spin blocker in the tier by far because of how bulky it is. Well, Sandygast sort of competes with it, but this is a bulky spin blocker through and through. Because what you can do is that you can pump up your defenses really high, Fluffy just halves all the damage you take, and you can hit back kind of hard. 15 attack is nothing to sniff at. Well, nothing to scoff at, not sniff at. I'm thinking of dogs. The good boy got on my mind, then I messed up. But you can make it really bulky if you want to. You can also run like a specialty defensive spread and not worry about like, oh, well, I mean, I don't have to really worry about putting a whole bunch into defense right now because, I mean, I already have so much from Fluffy. Why worry about it? I'll make myself a jack of all trades as opposed to like a one-trick pony, or one-trick dog in this case, I would assume. Like, you could run something like this, and then you become much harder to break over in general because of how good your special defense is. 50, 60, 55 in terms of bulk is really good. And because you have Ice Fang, you have Stomping Tantrum, and you're a physical wall, you deal with the 2 best rapid spinners in tier being Toadscool. I'll get those up real quick. So, Toadscool and Quaxly, and both of them are very often physical attackers. If we look at Toad utility, this one can be mixed, but also as a result it's got really bad defensive utility. Well, strictly defensive. Like, if you want a special defensive one, go for it, but because you have minus defense, you're not going to be taking like any hits from Girafarig. It's not happening, and you can't break over it because Knock is a contact move. Earth Power and Power Up aren't going to hit too hard without Eviolite getting knocked off, so there's that. And you can run the more specially defensive spread to stuff it. Then we have Quaxly, and it's running... It's still physically based set, but you can take it a lot better. You got Liquidation, Rapid Spin, Roost, Encore. It's definitely a worse matchup, seeing as you can't just delete it because you have Ice Fang. So, there's that, unfortunately. But, with Girafarig, you can yawn it, you can roar it out. I think you get... Do you get Thunder Fang? Yes, you do! So if you're really worried about that, you can run Thunder Fang, be able to threaten it somewhat, so that way you're not just a sitting duck versus Quaxly. It has a lot of flexibility, because it's actually got a surprisingly deep move pool. Also Destiny Bond. I think all of the ghosts have it. Like, fact check me on that one, I don't think all of them do, but the main impression is like, oh, well, that's almost like a signature move of the ghost types. It's just like, haha, you got me, but then I also got you. Meaning that a lot of these can trade really well. Even if they're worn down, even if they're on their last life, they can just use that and be able to delete your opponent's bonds. It's really nice. Next up, Sandygast. It's a little bit special because it has both Stealth Rock and a Ghost typing, meaning that you can just set Stealth Rocks whenever you want and not have to worry about them getting Rapid Spun because you spin for yourself. You also have the unique trait of a reliable recovery move in Shore Up, which is really fantastic. You have Earth Power and Shadow Ball as really good stab combination. And then your stat line's really nice. 55 HP, 80 defense, 70 special attack, all really good, especially when you have, like, passable special defense. Your speed and your attack don't really matter all that much. But also, Water Compaction, funnily enough, finally gets a use. Before, it was very often a laughingstock because it's a Ghost Ground type. You're already weak to water moves as is. And people can just go into a specially offensive water type, and then Water Compaction is functionally nothing. Well, with Terra type, you can Terra type into like water, into grass, and then you just take water attacks all day, and then your opponent can't kill you. So, I mean, what are they supposed to do? It's surprisingly really good at checking rain teams despite the fact that it's a ground type. And Water Compaction means that you can just keep on taking more and more attacks. They can't get rid of Stealth Rock, so they're going to have to play around that. And you can keep yourself healthy with Shore Up. And the big thing is that if we look at something like Fungus that has Synthesis, that is based on weather. And you have 25% HP back if you're in rain. However, Sandygast has the very unique trait of Shore Up being only a positive benefit. You get 2/3 in Sandstorm, 1/2 otherwise, so you can't even stuff its recovery using rain. It's surprisingly really effective because you have a lot of things going on. You have recovery, stealth rock, spin blocking, water compaction, meaning that you're a good rain check, despite the fact that you're Ghost Ground. And then you still have a good special attack stat plus a really nice stab combination to be able to hit a lot of stuff. It's really nice. But also, like, with Girafarig and Sandygast, they're both very defensive. You can't run offensive sets like Drifloon can with Unburdened stuff. Gastly can run Life Orb or Choice Scarf, and they've got the speed to really keep up with the rest of the tier, whereas Girafarig and Sandygast are just being left behind. So, Gastly's just way too good because it still has the 3 sets. Like Drifloon, Girafarig, and Sandygast, well, Sandygast, no, because you can't really run extra coverage moves. It doesn't really work out. Like, maybe if you want to run Giga Drain, you can, but that's, like, a little bit too specific. I think that you definitely want to have Earth Power or Shadow Ball and War, because it helps you with so many matchups. But the point is, Gastly can run a lot of different sets. Substitute, Nasty Plot, Life Orb with Substitute, and 3 attacks. You can also run Life Orb 4 attacks, and then that way your opponent... Whoopsie. That way your opponent can't predict you too well. Run Thunderbolt in the 4th slot, run Psychic, run Dazzling Gleam, go for whatever. And then your opponent still has to respect the substitute option because in the worst case scenario that you do sub up, then they're going to be behind if they didn't predict it. And then you also have Choice Scarf set. It's got a lot of flexibility really easily. And then the last ghost that deserves a mention is Bramblin. It's unique because it gets Rapid Spin to remove hazards while still blocking Rapid Spin because it's a ghost type. You also have recovery with Strength Sap, and then you have a good stab combination in Power Whip and Shadow Sneak, and it's finally good. In my Rapid Spin video, I said this is like literally unplayable. Why would you ever run Bramblin when Girafarig was running around and it would just stuff its stabs? Well, Girafarig is no longer running around, and now you have useful utility because Shadow Sneak, so you can hit Gastly, Drifloon, all the other ghosts as I mentioned, as well as being able to finish off mons that would otherwise like outspeed you and kill you. So, like, if Magnemite with a Choice Scarf is at 20% or something, you can finish it off. It's a good bit of priority. Also, with that being said, you have Wind Rider, which gives you a wind move immunity, which means that you're immune to Icy Wind, which gives you a much better matchup versus Surskit, which likes to set Sticky Web. So, you can just set up for borderline free versus it, which is nice. And then if they do try to Icy Wind you, you get an attack raise. So, all A-okay. Now, what actually helps out Ghosts a lot, and that is entry hazards. You have stuff like Stealth Rock, Toxic Debris from Glimmets, Toxic Spikes from Toxic Debris, I should say. You have Spikes support. I'm just now remembering that, just as a quick aside, Bramblin gets Spikes. I think it's overall unexplored because it was very, like, exceedingly underwhelming in Girafarig meta, because you just ran a Pokemon that was a worse version of Toadscool that just died to the Tier King. But now actually is not that much better, but it still is a really good one because of Shadow Snake. You can also run Spikes, because it gets that for whatever reason. So you have a little bit of the Sandygast energy there of, oh, well, I can set up hazards, and it's really hard to remove those hazards because I'm already blocking Rapid Spin, so deal with it. And speaking of entry hazards, having partners that can set them up, such as Glimmet, such as Pawniard, if you're running Eviolite Diglett. Life Orb Diglett is also really good for removing the things that want to attack into your ghost types, but having Stealth Rocks and Spikes that can't be removed gives you a lot of utility over the course of the game. Opponents can't just switch in, have their mons be all healthy. It breaks focus dashes really easily. It means that they get worn down and can't take attacks as much as they would like to. Even on something like Pawniard, which even if rocks are up and you only take one every time you switch in, it's still a-okay. You can still take the attacks perfectly fine. But it's a lot harder when you keep on getting chipped down and chipped down and chipped down. And then you also have to take attacks from the opposing team, and it just starts building up and building up and building up. And it can be really hard to deal with. Diglett can just, or because of Arena Trap, it removes Pokemon that would otherwise really annoy the Ghost types, like the Darks and the Steels if it needs to. You can do Terra type Dark, so that way you're not afraid of Sucker Punch, and then you can break over them with Earthquake. But then you also have stuff like Brawler that'll also threaten, as well as being a pretty nice partner, because it's very physically based, and being able to use Bulk Up really effortlessly when your opponent's burned because you have a lot of Will-O-Wisp support from Gastly and Drifloon, as well as Stealth Rock support. Like, it can be really annoying to deal with Brawler. It is really fearsome. It's pretty crazy. And then finally, Mudbray. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of surprised this is not S tier. It's kind of ridiculous how much punishment Mudbray can take on a daily basis just because it's got 70 HP, 70 defense. It's really fantastic. And it's still got a good special defense stat. And he was like, oh, well, it's got, like, kind of mediocre speed. Well, you can A, run a Choice Scarf set to fix that, or B, not really care and just run the Stamina set, which is absurd. So there you go. And it just takes a lot of attacks really well. Threatens out Pawniard. It can kind of take a knock because Stamina effectively negates it. So you get a lot of flexibility when it comes to, like, what exactly do you want to pair with your Ghost types? And they're all really good as a result. So what exactly do you want to hit? Oh, right. You have to talk about what's messing with these ghosts. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. Who called the Ghostbusters? Those kind of stuff. Well, as I mentioned before, Pawniard, it's Dark Steel, so it really effectively stuffs Gastly's stabs in Shadow Ball and Sledge Bomb. It has to be really wary of Terra Blast fighting, as well as Will-O-Wisps from any of Drifloon or Gastly. But it still can be really annoying to deal with because it can run a Swords Dance set if it wants to. It has Night Slash as good Dark Stabs, that way it can deal with opposing ghosts as opposed to using Iron Head. And also you can do like a whole bunch of Terra stuff here. You can do... Oh boy. I'm gonna do a flashback to Little Cup Winter League. Week 1, Game 1. The first game played that entire time was Corkscrew versus Wish Papillion. And it was just very funny because you could run Terra-type Dark, Swords Dance, Night Slash, Sucker Punch, Pawniard with a Life Orb, which was crazy and great inventive tech for the time. Because you can effectively go down to 19 HP, do the Life Orb stuff, and then just break through stuff, and it's really annoying for the Ghost to deal with. Because even when burned, you have to deal with the fact that it's Terra-type Dark, it's using Night Slash, which can crit, and you're also boosting your attack with Swords Dance. You gotta deal with that, it's not gonna be pretty. But also it's got a Choice Scarf set, so that way you can still break over things. It's pretty fun. Next up, Zorua. It's one of the few knockoff users, and I think it just kills everything. Even Eviolite Gastly does not want to take one of these. So, Zorua, Pivot, versus Gastly. Even the Eviolite set, it just dies to knockoff. It really can't handle it. So being able to even have this on the board also trick your opponent thinking like, oh, well, actually, I don't really care about burn too much because I'm a special attacker. Psych! I'm actually Zorua in disguise. I have knockoff. Also, you can't outspeed me because I have Sucker Punch. If I want to, I can run a Choice Scarf set and outspeed all the other non-Choice Scarf sets, still hit them with knockoff, get Nanade Nerd, deal with it. And you have a lot of options there. Also, if you want to, you can run Extra Sensory, and that's really fun tech that I want to run more if I can, because you hit Brawler as well as Terra-type fighting Gastly. So it's like, oh, well, I can just Terra-type into a fighting type, and then Terra Blast Zorua, and they'll be able to take the knockoff, because we go to Damage Calc again, and we go to Terra-type fighting. Well, then it becomes basically useless, but then if we go to Zorua, Choice Scarf, and then we have all these EVs, and then we have Extra Sensory, then you're not killing it, but you're still going to do a lot of damage, and it's not too hard to get, like, 6 points of damage on a Gastly. So, there's that. Give me. It's still really good versus the Ghost, but it has to be careful. Stunky. The Lord and Savior of just being very forgettable. But Stunky can do a lot of work versus the Ghost. Because of Poison Dark, it doesn't have to fear either of the moves that Gastly otherwise wants to hit it with. It gets enough speed for 18, meaning that it ties Gastly, which is really nice. You have Crunch, Sucker Punch, Play Rough, Fire Blast. You also have stuff like... Actually, you can run a Nasty Plot set as well, which is Nasty Plot, Dark Pulse, Sludge Bomb, Fire Blast, and then run max speed. But you can also run that, and it's perfectly fine at taking on Gastly as well as Drifloon. It's really hard to break over. And then you also have stuff like Explosion, if you want to have that. It's nowhere near as powerful as it was in other generations, but it's still a really nice move to be able to deny stuff like Toadscool trying to Rapid Spin, other stuff like that. You can also run Memento, so that way you can help other setup sweepers set up, so that's pretty cool. It's got a lot of flexibility. It's really crazy. And the ability Aftermath, it's not fantastic, but it's still got a good amount of utility as a result of physical moves dealing damage back. It deals with the Ghost so well. The only issue is that it gets trapped by Diglett, and that's it's a poison type. It gets trapped by Diglett. Well, yeah, but you also absorb Toxic Spikes, which is absurdly valuable, and you're not even walled by steals because you have Fire Blast. So, who's the winner here? Finally, Toadscool, and Tinkatink also gets a mention because it blanks a lot of what they want to do, and it also has knockoff to remove items, and that's really annoying. But it's got pitiful attack, and if you burn it, it's basically doing nothing for the rest of the game except being a sitting duck. It can set up rocks, it can knock off things, it can Thunder Wave, that's it. But Toad is the more important thing because it's got its absurd special defense, and you can still knock you off. It can use Power Whip to hit you pretty hard, and it can also Terra type into whatever it wants to avoid certain things. I can hit it really hard with Sludge Bomb. Oh, well, I just turned into a Steel type, and now I don't have to worry about Sludge Bomb anymore, so tough, and it's still a really good defensive typing. So it's something you have to really be aware of, but it's much more manageable when you either burn it or just get enough damage on it because it can't recover back, so. But that's the Paranormal Investigators that you really want to watch out for if you're ever running any of your Ghost types that can really mess with your day. But this is the Ghost-centered video. We gotta know what we've spoken. What have we spoken? Well, you can spook Gastly really well because it's got 4 Moveslot Syndrome and it really hates it. It's one of the Rapid Spinners. It's not as hampered as Toadscool is because Toadscool has really good special bulk. It also has knockoff so that we can still threaten the Ghosts and get a lot of progress versus them. Whereas Gastly, it's got Liquidation, and that's not bad. It's also got Encore. I think Quaxly's having a rough time of it currently because it wants to slot 5 moves. And they are Roost, Rapid Spin. Those are mandatory. Same as Liquidation because you need to have your Water Stab. But then the issue is I want to have Encore so that way I don't die to setup sweepers as well as annoying my opponents and locking them into favorable moves to give me better position. But also I want to run Brave Bird so that way I can hit the grass types that are running around. And I don't really have all the slots to do that because if I'm running Encore, then I get walled by the grass types. But if I'm not running Brave Bird, then I get set up on by a bunch of if I am running Brave Bird, I'm getting very confused. Pardon that. But if you're running Encore, then you have a lot of utility versus a lot of good neutral matchups, whereas Brave Bird gives you a lot of utility versus bad matchups, and it can be really hard to be able to justify one or the other, because if this doesn't have Encore, then it gets set up on by stuff like Shoulder and Choodle. It can't deal with Brave Bird also having recoil is really unfortunate for it, and that makes its bulk even worse. It's really hard to have this also have to deal with Will-O-Wisps from Gastly, having to deal with how annoying Drifloon is versus it, Grievard stuffs it. Heck, even Sandygast, you think it'd have a good matchup? Nah, because Liquidation's a Water-type move, and Water Compaction boosts the defense, so it gets stuffed by all of them. And then Bramblin even dumpsters on this, because if you're not running Brave Bird, it just hits you with Power Whip and you can't do anything about it. So it's got a really rough matchup versus all the Ghost types, and all of them really want to be run. Next up, Nimble. When everything there resists or... well, I was about to say quadruple resist, but that's only Gastly and Drifloon. Everything resists it, except for Bramblin. But having those ghosts be really bulky and be able to take your first impressions and U-turns is really bad, especially when, well, Gastly threatens a burn and also can come in really easily because it's a quadruple resist, meaning that even though you have Tinted Lens, it doesn't do anywhere near as much as you want it to. Drifloon can do the same while also threatening Acrobatics. Girafarig just makes it so that way you can't do too much about it because of Fluffy. Sandygast takes it kind of poorly, but also it can set up Stealth Rocks. It can heal itself up with Shore Up. It's really hard for Nimble to justify its existence. And you can't even use Sucker Punch too reliably because they want to status you anyway. And it's still a contact move, so it doesn't work versus Girafarig. So there's that. Gothita, you're really willing to spook, as well as Diglett, because they both have the trapping abilities, and, oh, well, guess what, idiot? I can't be trapped because I'm a ghost type, because ghost types have that property for whatever reason. They would probably be a lot more balanced if they could be trapped, but they can't be, so we just have to deal with it. But Gothita can't trap them, Diglett can't trap them, and that means that although they can do some counterplay around it, like, oh, Diglett can substitute, or Gothita can trick something on the switch in, well, you can't trap Gastly, and it can really threaten both of you back really easily. You also like spooking the fighting types because they do not like having their biggest stab move and, well, their fighting moves, not fighting punch. Fighting punch, yes, the very famous move. But Crabrawler's Drain Punch is really good for it because it recovers HP, and it not getting any HP back is really bad. Mankey loves spamming close combat, and if it can't do that anymore and has to rely on something like Night Slash, it's going to have a much harder time versus a lot of neutral matchups. And also just like, oh, well, I just blank your strongest stab move, so deal with it. And even U-turn doesn't get much progress versus a lot of them because they resist it. And even if you're trying to run Stone Edge for them, that's not great either. So overall, it's really hard for the fightings to be able to deal with the ghost types, like in any sense of the well at all. And if you're wondering, oh well, you know, you're just talking theory. It could also be that in practice, Gastly's terrible because it's still got bad bulk. Well, let's go to Little Cup Winter League. Usage stats for week 2. If they can one out week 1, not week 1 because week 1 had Girafarig legal, so there's that. Gastly has 28 uses, which is 93%. If you're wondering, that's like 4 or 5 teams that did not run Gastly. Everybody's running Gastly, all right? Oh boy, it is very popular. People wanted to use Gastly because of how good it is. If I just go to like, oh, I don't know, I'll just go here. What do we got? Double Gastly, baby. We got a whole bunch of Gastly. And I would consider it still like significantly more healthier than Girafarig because, actually, if I go to Girafarig in Little Cup Winter League week 1, and then we go to the stats for there. So we have, Girafarig has really similar usage, so hooray for that. Actually, it has a little bit less, and I think the reason for that is just people didn't want to have to put in too much effort, so they just used Rain. But, like, those are both really similar, but the main thing that made Girafarig so broken, whereas Gastly is significantly more balanced, is like, well, it's always going to be a special attacker, and although it can boost up, although it can be Will-O-Wisp, you can still deal with it with, like, the same stuff. Even if Pawniard's burned, it still annoys Gastly because it has to burn it and or use Terra Blast. It still hates taking Night Slashes. If it's running the Life Orb set, it's literally just gas. It dies really easily. Even Nimble's going to do a whole bunch of damage to it. Like, let's see here. So Nimble versus Gastly Life Orb. You still do like half of his HP with one attack. And that's really bad for Gastly, because if it's at like 50% or less and it's Life Orb, it ain't taking those hits. And even the Choice Scarf set doesn't want to see it. Because like, doing that much to revenge kill a Scarfer when its main utility is that you can't revenge kill it too easily because of how fast it is. You have to deal with it defensively, which is really hard. Well, congratulations. It's actually really, really easy to break over, which is funny. And then, like, with all of these, like, you still have Shadow Sneak is now online as a viable option. Before, you had Sucker Punch as the best priority to deal with Girafarig, which you could really easily tear out of. You can still do that now, but the point is that, well, I mean, Shadow Sneak is not reliant on prediction. You can just click it, and then, bo, I still have my priority attack. It's all okay. So it's significantly easier to attack in a Gastly that way. Is it broken? Does it deserve to be banned? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Because if we go to week 3, guess what the new slot is? We have the Gastly ban. For people who didn't know, for every single week that we have the tournament, we have the first 4 slots are Scarlet and Violet. Then we have the Suspect slot, which it was Girafarig Suspect slot in week 1. Then if we go to week 2, then what we have is the Terrablast ban slot. And now finally we have come full circle in order to see, well, we had a lot of Gastly usage. Is Gastly worth a ban? So we're going to find that out over this week. Maybe, maybe not. I think the metagame's already stupidly healthier because Girafarig isn't gone. And we still have, like, the paranormal activity people. Like, we have a lot of good checks because of how good the dark types are to be able to deal with the ghosts, and then also just Toad over here. So, I don't think it's too unhealthy, but with that conditional, I can understand that it's not the healthiest because it's got a lot, like, it still has a lot of variety. You can still run Eviolite, Life Orb, Choice Scarf, and it's really hard to tell before they start attacking, and that can mean the difference between life and death when it comes to your matches. So, we'll just have to wait and see whether or not the new Tier King gets dethroned immediately after he got on the throne. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you could like, share, and subscribe, that'd be awesome. And as always, have a good day.